Scott, over the years, you and I have been monitoring and talking about the adventures of President Donald Trump. Um, this one is slightly different because we're talking about criminal charges. Talk us through it. How would it work?
Well, there's a slight correction, Alexis, in that the House Select Committee on the Capitol attack itself cannot charge Trump with anything. It doesn't have the power to lay criminal charges because it's not a court. What the House committee can do, and what it is likely to do on Monday, is to recommend
Hmm.
that the Justice Department consider the investigation of Trump on these charges. Now, that's still quite serious because if the Justice Department comes back and says there's enough evidence to pursue these charges, Trump will face a criminal case in a court. But of course, it raises the question of will the Justice Department make that decision to actually pursue criminal proceedings against a former president, not only because of the legal considerations, but because of the political considerations?
Is this a big hot potato for President Biden? Because, of course, it would be construed or could be construed as President Biden knocking out a potential candidate that he may face in a next election.
I don't think it's a problem specifically for Biden because he's distanced himself both from the House committee investigation. He says, look, that's a matter for Congress to pursue, not the executive. And he has been very careful to distance himself from any Justice Department investigation of Trump, saying quite rightly, that's up to the Justice Department. I have no role, and it would be wrong to intervene in that proceeding. I think it is a hot potato for the Justice Department because I think every Trumpist in the US and beyond is going to come after the Justice Department and lay all the rhetoric, all the unsupported claims that it's part of a deep state conspiracy against this poor man who is now in Florida and can't even get on Twitter. But I think that the Justice Department is in a. I think the balance may have changed, Alexis, in terms of the Justice Department decision, if I can explain why quickly. And that is, if you were talking about this last year, in the months after the Capitol attack, even though we had clear evidence, have very clear evidence that Trump incited that attack, I think it would have been difficult for the Justice Department to move at that point. Now, Trump is weakened. Trump is politically weakened with many Republicans, especially within the Republican mainstream, turning against him because, frankly, he looks like a loser after the midterms. And I think a weakened Trump politically, combined with the fact that even by his scales of craziness, he's actually jacked it up to 11 in recent days, makes Trump more vulnerable to the Justice Department thinking this isn't a case of us going after a guy who's likely to get reelected in 24. So therefore, the possibility of criminal proceedings doesn't carry as much political damage.
Scott, as you said, the committee in Congress can suggest to the Department of Justice to go ahead with criminal proceedings. What is their sort of strongest bit of evidence, if you like? Because, of course, this committee has been looking into the Capitol riots for quite some time now. What is that bit of evidence where they say, well, look, based on this, we recommend a criminal prosecution?
You're not just talking about smoking gun here, Alexis. You're talking about smoking firing range. Next week, at the same time the committee releases its report after its investigation, it will release the evidence behind that report, including more than 1,000 interviews with witnesses, including members of Trump's family, members of his inner circle, to give you a couple of, key pieces of evidence that are there. First of all, there is significant evidence that Trump and his inner circle in the run up to January 6th discussed trying to prevent Congress from approving the election of Joe Biden. They put pressure on Vice President Mike Pence not to allow that proceeding to continue. Pence refused. They then spoke to certain Republican congressmen to try to block it. Some congressmen agreed to work with them, but it was not enough to prevent the vote from taking place. So they then put the message out to Trumpists, which is you might need to go and stop the steal. Trump's own words. Secondly, when you talk about obstruction of a government investigation, Trump has repeatedly either himself refused subpoenas or he has been in contact with those who have refused subpoenas to testify, including a couple of folks who've been convicted, such as our old friend, Steve Bannon, his former chief strategist. And thirdly, the charge to defraud the US government, that comes down to the attempt to steal the election. Trump's attempt to effectively lie about the election outcome, all the failed legal challenges, and especially his pressure on state legislatures to overturn the legal ballots in favor of Biden and insert Trump's electors so he could cling on to the White House.
Gosh, that's a lot to deal with. And on top of that, Scott, as you and I have been talking about Trump over the years, there is on a separate issue a decision for Trump to release his tax records, which I think became an issue even before he got into office. What's happening with that?
Yeah, before he got into office, the question of releasing tax records wasn't a legal issue. It was a question more of what is common practice. You know, every presidential candidate, I think from the 1970s, had released tax returns, and Trump refused to, as we later find out, because he pays very little in taxes and can justifiably be accused of tax avoidance. Now it becomes a legal issue because the House Ways and Means Committee, which is investigating the general question of a president's accountability when they're in office, a president's conflicts of interest when they're in office, specifically the powers of the Internal Revenue Service to actually get tax returns. They said, we need these tax returns, Trump's tax returns, for our hearings, and the courts backed them up. Trump has tried to delay. He stalled on the process for, I think, 3 years. But now I think he's got no recourse other than to turn over the documents to the House committee. That will, on one level, be simply an investigation generally about what should be done regarding future presidents. But of course, as those tax returns actually reinforce the idea that Trump may have committed not only tax avoidance, but something more serious, then he is exposed to further liability.
Scott, there was a big announcement from the former president yesterday, Donald Trump. He also likes to sort of announce his announcements. So he'll say, "Join me on Tuesday or next week. Big announcement coming." Now he had a big announcement this week. Tell us a little bit about it. What did he announce?
Oh, the Trumpists were so excited. They thought, oh, Donald is going to reveal a piece of evidence that will take Joe Biden down, or that he'll announce maybe his vice presidential running mate for 2024. Trump released a video, basically a huckster's video, which said, you know, folks out there, I'm excited to tell you that you're a great president, greater than Lincoln, greater than Washington. You can get a digital trading card of your great president for only $99. Not a real card, not the kind we used to collect. Remember, Alexis, for footballers
Yeah.
back in the old days? But one that you just would put on your computer and say, look, there's a picture of Donald Trump ripping off his suit to show underneath a Superman logo. Now, there's a bit of backstory to this, Alexis. As crazy as it is to spend $99 on a guy who's not in office and who basically is trying to cover his legal costs by buying a digital card, when Trump came out of the hospital after suffering coronavirus, having previously denied coronavirus, when he came out of the hospital, he told his advisors, you know what I'm going to do when I leave that hospital? I'm going to show America what I really am. I'm going to rip open my white shirt, and underneath there'll be a Superman shirt. So beyond the lunacy of the digital trading cards is the, I would say, double lunacy of a guy who actually believes he's Superman and is going to try to fly his way into the office in 2024, despite what any court or House committee says should really be the case to keep him out of.
And these are the NFTs, non-fungible tokens, which do confuse a lot of people, including myself. But basically, yes, one-off digital copies that you can buy for just under $100. Scott, what's he doing with all that money? I mean, is he raising a war chest to run? Is he raising a war chest to fight legal battles? Where's all this money going?
Well, Donald Trump in the past has raised money by various appeals to his supporters, you know, repeated calls for email donations, selling off his signature, selling off other memorabilia. And he used some of that money, but only some of it, to fund candidates in 2022 for Congress, a lot of whom didn't win. He's using some of that money to build up a bank chest in case he wants to run in 2024 for president. But got to be honest with you, Alexis, I won't use certain terms here because it could get us into legal trouble. Trump's a guy who likes to grab money wherever he can and to get it however he can. You might remember Trump University,
Hmm.
which eventually had to close down
I
because it was
remember
found
Trump. I remember Trump steaks. Do you remember those? There was a
Trump's,
sort of Trump.
Trump's Trump steaks that had to go because the steaks weren't that good. Trump
Right.
vodka, there was that as
Oh, I
well.
missed that one.
Uh, the Trump the Trump Apprentice board game, if you wanted it. Uh, Donald Trump even, and this is on record, so we're safe here, he even took money which was supposed to go to charities, and he actually used it to buy things that he liked, like professional football helmets, American football, not soccer ball. So Trump's, some would say that there's a history in America of guys, and you can see it in our movies, in our music, the grifters, the guys who like to make a quick buck off of the gullible, the snake oil salesman. Far from me being, far from me saying that a digital trading card, which doesn't exist except on your computer as an NFT, far from me to say that that's the latest example of grifting. I'll leave it to y'all to decide.